Hi, this is Ed Driscoll. Welcome to Silicon Graffiti. On January 8th, the following clip aired on CNN.
In any war, civilians always pay the heaviest price. And to pick just one example from Gaza, on Wednesday, a 12-year-old boy and his friend were killed while they were playing. Footage of his death was shot by the boy's older brother. Obviously, we warn you now, it's disturbing to see. Michael Holmes has details.
At a Gaza hospital, doctors try to revive a victim of the violence. Their efforts in vain. 12-year-old Mahmoud is dead. Recording the tragedy, Mahmoud's own brother, freelance cameraman Ashraf Mashharawi, determined, he says, to show the world the human cost of this conflict.
Did CNN fake this footage? It certainly seems plausible, as a doctor who reads Charles Johnson's popular Little Green Footballs blog emailed in.
Quote, "I'm no military expert, but I am a doctor, and this video is bull." The chest compressions that were being performed at the beginning of this video were absolutely, positively fake. The large man in the white coat was not performing CPR on that child. He was just sort of tapping the child's sternum a little bit with his fingers. You can't make blood flow like that. In short, the resuscitation scene at the beginning is fake, and it's a pretty lame fake at that, unquote.
In response to such criticism, CNN initially removed the clip, but a day later they doubled down and restored it to their website along with a note that said, quote, "Responding to accusations that the resuscitation efforts of Mashharawi's brother appeared inauthentic, Martin said that, based on his years of reporting from Gaza, doctors often go through such efforts even with little hope that a patient can be saved," unquote. As Charles Johnson of Little Green Footballs replied, quote, "If they really had little hope that the patient could be saved, they'd be going all out with CPR, which means very vigorous chest compression. It's not unusual to break ribs if it's done right, and ventilation to oxygenate the blood, not delicately touching the boy's abdomen with the tips of their fingers as we see in the video clips," unquote. But if the jury is still out on that clip, let's look back on just a few of the news reports from this decade that we now know conclusively were faked.
In 2007, bloggers noted several discrepancies in a piece by Scott Thomas Beauchamp, a young Army recruit who began contributing articles to the New Republic. In August of 2006, the bogus story of the day was this photo taken by a freelance Reuters stringer in Gaza named Adnan Haj, as this CNN report documents.
The plumes of smoke raised suspicions among bloggers, especially Charles Johnson of the site Little Green Footballs. He said smoke had been added to the image, probably using a Photoshop clone tool. Reuters pulled the photograph and posted the original on its website.
To their credit, Reuters issued a picture kill update, alerting their customers in the media that the picture had been identified as a fraud. But the photo is merely one symptom of a much larger condition. In January of 2005, Eason Jordan, then chief news executive with CNN, attended the World Economic Forum in Davos. Jordan used the forum as a vehicle to ponder aloud, as this blog post from the forum indicates, if the US was deliberately targeting journalists for assassination in Iraq. After a media tussle that lasted a couple of weeks, Jordan resigned from CNN. Perhaps because Davos wasn't the first time that Jordan slandered the troops.
Eason Jordan in Portugal in November said that the American military had targeted and killed 10 journalists and that the American military had tortured journalists. He said he believed those reports. That one got past the blogosphere.
John Hinderocker, when I see this kind of bias against our military that defends us around the world, I say, hey, it's time to fight back. Was that also your motivation?
Yeah, I think it was, Larry. I mean, the mainstream reporting on this story has been absolutely terrible. They've really covered up the fact that Eason Jordan is a serial slanderer of the American troops, and that's a key fact here.
He actually made a speech against the Israeli military along similar grounds, which is really
same thing in 2002. And here again, he claimed that the Israeli military had shot a CNN person, implying that it was intentional. And if you go back and look at the original CNN news story filed by the people who were caught in a crossfire between Arab guerrillas and Israeli soldiers, that's not how they reported the story at all. So in that instance, we know he's wrong.
Also in 2005, the media really let it all hang out during the early days of Hurricane Katrina,
as this October 2005 exchange titled Echo Chamber in the Superdome between Reason magazine and Major Ed Bush, public affairs officer for the Louisiana National Guard, highlights. Reason magazine asked Bush, on September 1st, there was a report that perhaps a Chinook helicopter at the Superdome was fired upon before daybreak. Do you know whatever became of that? Was that true? Where does the report come from specifically? Etc. Bush replied, I was at the Superdome for 8 days, and I don't remember hearing anything about a helicopter getting shot at the dome. Reason, that's interesting. Bush, oh, not really. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there that never happened at the dome, as I think America's beginning to find out slowly. In 2004, the previous year, Dan Rather was of course caught cooking the books in what became known as Rathergate, thanks in part to Charles Johnson's famous throbbing memo. In 2003, Eason Jordan, yes, the same person we just mentioned, publicly admitted in a New York Times op-ed titled "The News We Kept to Ourselves" that CNN had been allowing Saddam Hussein's regime to censor their news reports for years in order to have CNN correspondents report live from Baghdad.
And also in 2003, the New York Times admitted that reporter Jason Blair invented or plagiarized numerous articles. Of course, Jason Blair operated in a culture born from original sin. In 1932, the New York Times' Walter Duranty won the Pulitzer for his reporting on the Soviet Union. This was the period in which Stalin used famine as a weapon, starving millions of peasants. As Roger Kimball of the New Criterion noted in 2003, quote, with peasants dropping like flies everywhere around him, Duranty cheerfully cabled back to New York that although there were some occasional food shortages, there was no actual starvation. That's good news, Walter. Just what we wanted to hear. Have a Pulitzer, unquote. Despite frequent criticism ongoing to this day, the New York Times is yet to return Duranty's Pulitzer. In 2003, the Pulitzer Board said in an official statement that although Duranty's work fell short of, quote, today's standards for foreign reporting, there was no clear and convincing evidence of deliberate deception, unquote. But what is it about Duranty's reporting that falls short of today's low standards for big media? Like Duranty in the 30s, today's media often seems to work harder at keeping stories out of the news than getting them into circulation. For example, big media is slowly pulling their journalists from Baghdad, and Iraq has quietly vanished from the 6:30 p.m. network news, where the standard operating procedure is, if it bleeds, it leads. Which is why, in order to send some sign to America that the war in Iraq was won, the blogger known as Zombie Time declared November 22, 2008 as Victory in Iraq Day, because big media wasn't about to. It's possible to wave off some journalistic mistakes as inevitable. As anyone from a beginning blogger to a 20-year veteran reporter knows, much of journalism is done on the fly, attempting to meet deadlines. Newspapers are called the first draft of history for a reason. Any writer knows that his first draft is guaranteed to be his most mistake-prone. But the botched reporting we've just explored was all done to push forward a bias and a preconceived storyline. Having a bias isn't the problem, provided it's properly disclosed to readers, and not hidden behind a veneer of Olympian objectivity. But deliberately getting facts wrong, or suppressing stories that are harmful to your side's agenda is, particularly when you've held yourself out as a quote-unquote objective news organization. In July of 2008, the National Enquirer broke the story on John Edwards' extramarital affair. The prominent former Democratic senator was then widely being discussed as a possible vice presidential nominee for Barack Obama, or possibly his attorney general. Concurrently, and likely not coincidentally, Tony Pierce, the blog editor of the LA Times, put the kibosh on his writers discussing Edwards' affair in public. He signed off on his request for silence, keep rockin'. And from that Orwellian point of view, old media has rocked very hard indeed over the course of this decade. For Silicon Graffiti, I'm Ed Driscoll.